If you've watched any of my previous videos, you may be familiar with the basic steps that are required to handle a trust after somebody has died. Oftentimes the trustee is somebody who is the adult child of the parents, and they are going to be in charge of managing that trust and distributing those assets out to not just themselves, but to their siblings. So that's kind of some context for this discussion here. And what I want to talk about is the specific duties that that trustee has. So if you've been put in charge of mom or dad's trust, the first thing to know is that you are now a fiduciary. So what is a fiduciary? A fiduciary is somebody whose job is to do the highest and best job possible on behalf of the beneficiaries of that trust. So those beneficiaries are likely to be you as well as your siblings, and your job is to do what's best for them and not just think about what's the easiest thing to do as the trustee. So that's the overarching theme of this, is you're a fiduciary, and then there are a bunch of duties that you have in that job. So oftentimes people aren't aware that even though this is a trust and it's something that can be handled outside of court, there are actually a whole series of laws that govern what your job is as the trustee. So a few of those key duties that you have, I'm going to touch on quickly. One of those duties is a duty to keep your parents' assets separate from your own assets. Obviously this makes sense, but when you have a fiduciary duty, this becomes super critical. So you never want to take money out of mom and dad's trust and put it into your account without being very aware of what you're doing there. So that's the first thing. You can loan money to your parents' trust if you need to put some money in there to pay for things like funeral expenses, but just be careful if you're ever taking anything out of their trust. The second duty to point out is a duty of impartiality. So you have the job to treat each of your siblings the same, and even more importantly, to treat yourself the same as your siblings. So you need to wait to distribute to yourself until you're also making those distributions to your siblings. And sometimes you may have one sibling who really needs the money right away. Just be aware you can't give them money ahead of any of the rest of the family. So that's the duty of impartiality. The next one I want to mention has to do with investments. So your job with your parents' assets is to handle their assets the way a reasonably prudent investor would handle things. And beyond that, you have a duty to use modern portfolio theory. So this is an area where I often advise my trustees, get some help. Don't try to decide for yourself, how should I invest these things? And this is a place where we will often bring in a financial advisor to make sure that we're handling things appropriately. Now, obviously, if the trust is going to have a very short duration, a few months or under a year, this is less critical. But if you're going to be managing money for a grandchild or somebody who is younger, this becomes super important to do reasonably prudent investment. And this applies even if your parents had a particular investment philosophy. You can't just stick with their philosophy. If that philosophy wasn't reasonably prudent, you can't rely on that. You have a job to change that. So if mom and dad had all rental properties and no money in stock, that may not be appropriate. You may have to take some steps to diversify. And then finally, I want to talk about the duty of accounting. And this is so important, I will record a separate video on this. But as the trustee of the trust, you have a duty to keep track of every penny that is coming in or out of mom and dad's trust from the time they die all the way until the time you distribute. So even if you think, well, my siblings are not going to ask for that, you have a duty to keep those records, and unless they waive that duty, you have to hold on to those. So it's always best to start tracking right away, keep very detailed records of all the specifics of what's in that trust, so that you'll have all the paperwork you need in the future to avoid any disputes and for the family to be happy. So It's great when parents have asked somebody to be the trustee of the trust. It's definitely a privilege. They trusted you to do that job. It's also important, though, to realize that you are now a fiduciary, and that being a fiduciary means you have some very important duties so that you can provide the best result for your family, and hopefully the family will be cohesive and the siblings will give you a high five instead of pointing the finger at you when you're all done with this trust administration. If you need any help, give us a call. We're always happy to help answer any specific questions you have and guide you in this process. Thank you.